Well, it's time to get started, and want to thank all of you for coming, and for our friends on Zoom as well. We've got a large participation on Zoom too, so I'm going to try to do my best to manage the audience here, and Matthew's going to try to do his best to manage those on Zoom best we can. So the voice that you are hearing is Treg Hopkins, and excited to be here with you today to talk about data and really just how we can communicate the data and the decisions that we're making, and kind of what that story is telling out in our community. So we say here, welcome to a journey where numbers become narratives and statistics transform into stories of real human impact. That's really why we're here today, is to talk about those types of things. I'm a certified quantitative methodologist, so I usually work kind of on that quantitative side, but working with people all of the time, I have to narrate that and kind of bring it to a level that people relate to it. And what does the data mean? What is that storytelling? So that's where this topic came from. And next up, I'm going to have our other presenter here introduce himself and share a little bit about what he does with data and companies and partnerships as well.
Thank you, Treg. And thank you all for being here. In our field, we actually are asked about our numbers quite often, our completions, attendance, test scores, but those numbers honestly don't really capture the heart of what we do. So my name is Dr. Matthew Pranger. And today what we're going to talk about are those numbers actually to tell a deeper story, but also stories that show a transformation, also perseverance, and then that real human impact. So really this is just more about, more than just reports. It's more than the reports. It's really about that data and using data to elevate our voices and to elevate the voices of our students inside of our programs. So whether you're talking to a funder, a policymaker, or even a neighbor down the street, the ability to communicate the why behind our numbers is really truly what moves people to care and also to act. So by the end of this session, we'll walk away with some practical tools, really not just theory. We'll break down really how to gather meaningful data, and then also how to connect that to real outcomes, and how to frame that into a compelling narrative that really fully supports that funding, the engagement, and then mostly growth.
So I think when it begins, and we're tasked with communicating what the data is saying, our mind kind of shifts immediately to this idea of talking percentages and whole numbers and what's happening just numerically. And oftentimes we're talking to people that really, they're not as connected to those numbers as what we are. So we're communicating it almost in a foreign language, where they're asking for our story. They're asking like, well, are we getting gains here? Or what is the success of your program? And we're communicating it by sharing, well, it's this many students or this many IETs, this is what our goals are, and this is how we're achieving them. But I don't think that they always really understand like that each one of those numbers is a student's life that's been changed, and that their path to success was driven by that number. And when we're communicating it out in the community, we want it to tell a story. We want people to connect with that these numbers are telling a story. And today we're going to explore what that story sounds like.
Yeah, that's pyramid. So adult education, it touches the lives of individuals who often navigate major life transitions. So that may be immigrants who are learning English, adults who are seeking better jobs, and parents modeling lifelong learning for their children. I believe that we've even seen parents start higher education with their children. So these really are not just students in general, they're families, they're workers, and their neighbors, all trying to build a better future. So every enrollment number does represent a story, and those stories matter. So if we look at, yep, that's a pyramid. We started really at that foundation, our students, that student success. This is where the life-changing outcomes happen. We're going to see them earn that GED. They're going to learn to read, secure employment. And that's where the heart is. But to sustain that success, we need our shareholders' trust. Transparency, accountability, clear communication, that's all about that impact. This is what really keeps the funders, our partners, and the public invested in our mission. And then at the very top, we have that program excellence. This is the results that using the data is really just not for compliance, but for insight. Identifying really what's working, where we can grow, and then how we can continue to evolve to serve our communities even better. So when we approach data this way, it stops becoming that bureaucratic task, and it actually becomes an advocacy tool. It gives us the language to actually fight for our program. And I believe many of you have not just like, yeah, we have a good program, but I think many of you have actually had to fight for your actual program. And the data is really what will back you up. Is you're fighting for the program, you're fighting for actually the learners and the future that you're trying to help build.
So I'm thinking about it this way, and I think some of you are here today because funding is changing. And if I asked you to come up with a conversation that you would be able to have in your community with your legislators explaining how does the funding formula work for your program? Anybody in here have something that they would be able to say in just 7 words what that would be? Explaining, no, that would be yeah. Anybody even in here know what your funding formula is or how to figure it out, right? Like, so we know it sometimes, but it's hard to communicate it, right? And we're talking to people, if we're communicating this story, a lot of programs right now are being faced with challenges in their funding. They're seeing declines. I was hearing just as I was working our booth at Connectable, like people coming up and saying we had a 20% reduction, a 17% reduction, a 12% reduction. Most of them were over 10% from what I've heard just kind of deduced from conversations. The reality is we don't have the data yet on how it's actually impacting the programs and what is that average percent of decline. But what we do know is that we're being tasked more than ever to be able to have these difficult conversations about what will funding cuts do to our communities? What will it do to our workforce development and our employers? It doesn't just impact that individual student and their families, but it's impacting the entire community within our states. So we want to be able to have these conversations in ways that explains, how is this information impacting not just one particular student, but the overall picture out in that community. And it can be a struggle to try to talk about it, especially when it's outside of this room or outside of our program, outside of our colleagues. But when I'm just talking to an employer partner or a county commissioner and I'm asking them to support workforce training with dollars, I'm going to point out a good colleague of ours, Laura Elsbrock. If you were in her session earlier this morning, I went to the 8 o'clock session, so I've been up for a minute. And it was interesting in her session, she was talking about how she worked with her county commissioners to secure funding to provide training. And they're doing not just a bulk amount of money of like $10,000, I believe, but additionally $2,500 every month, putting a line item in the budget, helping secure that funding. That didn't just happen. It's that she had to know how to communicate the data and the difference that the data was saying. What is the story the numbers are telling? And you've got to have good systems in place that report it in a clear manner so that you know the numbers, that you understand them, that you can see them at a glance very quickly. She could pull up and tell you right now on her phone exactly how many students are in the program, how many have succeeded, how many are expected to complete, where those people are expected to go. So connecting it with those employers, it takes that relationship, but it takes you to be able to know your data well enough to be able to tell it as a story, and it's sometimes just through case studies. She shared an incredible story about one of her students that really walked through this path of success, and it was challenging. It was full of challenges like many of your students are. And every turn of that corner, it was another incredible piece of the story that led to that journey of success where that 22-year-old was making $22 an hour. And prior to that, they weren't making anything. They didn't have a GED. They didn't make it through homeschool. So these stories are important, and we want to connect it to the numbers. It's important to be able to share, like a student like that came from absolutely nothing, on the verge of homelessness, came to a program for 8 weeks and walked out with a $22 an hour job, came back to the program later and said, I want to be able to earn more, to do more. Now I'm interested in CNC. Well, what does that look like? How many jobs exist in your community for CNC? These are the things that we need to know and be able to communicate in our communities.
So let's talk about some data collection strategies. With any type of project, if you're not putting your time and effort into the planning stage, then the end product probably not going to be that best. So you need to plan thoughtfully. It's important to gather as much data as needed, but just enough. So you need to find that balance between what it is that you actually need to collect and what do you want to collect. So again, line your data collection really with your program's missions and your program's goals. So there are a few simple tools that you could use. You really don't have to have the most expensive systems to gather valuable information. Connectable offers some great solutions for the schools in my state, many others, and I do like that it's a nonprofit like COABE, specifically for adult ed. And Connectable does offer a lot of tools that are included with the membership, but if you're not a Connectable member, I guess at least not yet, there are some other tools out there like Google. Google offers a wide array of tools like Google Forms for collecting that student feedback, or just basic spreadsheets for tracking attendance that can yield powerful insights. And again, they're free. You want to be able to consider forming data sharing partnerships with different workforce boards, other community colleges, or just even employers in your local community to enrich your understanding of those long-term outcomes. And then foster partnerships. I mean, data is key when you're going to be able to tell the community, the story of your community impact, but who is it you're going to tell? But really, like, you need to foster those partnerships with community organizations to be able to have someone to tell that relevant data. You tell your local communities, partnerships, or who you've formed a partnership with, they're going to tell others. And perhaps even those partnerships may have data of their own that would apply to your cause. And then it comes down to, you have the data in hand, maybe there's some privacy that we need to protect there. I understand like FERPA, key. But there's also this thing called like ethics that we have to consider when we have data. So something to consider. You want to be able to implement those ethical practices for data security and then also that confidentiality. So questions like, who is it that has access to our data and what type of data do they have access to? And what type of access do they even have? Is it that they can look at the data, who this person is in an organization, or have you given full access to the data to someone and they have permission to change it and they shouldn't have? So it's really important to offer the most restrictive level of access as a key and then provide access from there when it comes to security.
And when we're thinking about these systems, and of course, like free systems are helpful, especially when we're trying to navigate budgets and figure out how to use these online and digital tools. And we'd like to think that they're inherently secure. But the reality is that oftentimes they're not. So having something on a shared Google spreadsheet that people in your office can access is pretty vulnerable. Using something like Google Voice sounds like a really good idea at first, until you recognize that it's not really FERPA compliant. It's not tracking in the way that's required to put it onto the student file, that all of that communication can be requested at any time, and that the student is required by law to be able to provide that data to them. Sometimes data is not a number. Sometimes data is a text message or an email or even a piece of paper that you've handed the student with information on it that they may be able to take home, like a schedule reminder. So protecting data, it goes beyond just protecting account numbers, protecting, numbers, wages and things like that, your employee records and things. So we want to keep in mind the tools that we're using also need to secure the data that you're about to share. And then when you're fostering these partnerships, you want to really have that conversation, almost like an interview. When you're meeting with these community partners or these potential partners, finding out what data is important to them. If they have employer goals, say they're trying to hire, increase their, staff, you want to find out like, well, what percentage of your staff come from the adult population? And maybe they don't have that number. So now you're able to start putting in front of them that, it's an unrealized target then that we could actually achieve. Let's set a goal. Let's say that we want to hire 15% new hires from the adult ed program. What would that look like? How many students would we need to produce for you to be able to have that? And then entering into those partnerships, even if it's temp to hire, where they get to start with an employer kind of before they're finished, that they put conditions on that we have the data that supports that when students earn a GED, that they're more likely to advance in the career, more likely to retain in the employer, and that we can share that information with them so that we are attractive, that they want to hire and recruit from adult ed programs.
Now, I just want to briefly go through and summarize the different types of data that we would be able to collect to tell that compelling story. So when we talk about using data to tell a story, the strongest narratives really pull from multiple types of information, not just those numbers off of the spreadsheet. So we'll start with that. The numbers from the spreadsheet are quantitative. Quantitative would be those numerical values. It would, as we see, enrollment, completion rates, test scores, job placement, wage increases. These figures are foundational, but they do help show really the scale, the growth, efficiency of your program. But as I alluded to get started here, the numbers really don't speak to that why or the how. And that's where qualitative data comes in. Qualitative data, it's crucial. Those are our student testimonials, instructor observations, all the way down to our community reflections. That gives our data a voice. They humanize the impact and give context to your outcomes. One of my very first full-time jobs, I was working with like Epson America as a technician, and I was technician 1421.
Still remember.
I'll never forget it.
They still call him that.
It's Dr. 1421. But the thing is that I was like, I'm more than a number. Did you know that I am? And they were looking really quantitative. I was like, but it was hard yesterday, and that's why I didn't get that quote. But 1421, you needed to get 10 units. So to humanize and understand the context, that's where the qualitative data comes into play. But then finally, we have longitudinal data, which really helps us zoom out, see the bigger picture over time. So rather really than just measuring one moment, looking at how we are doing right now to react and react, the longitudinal data will actually help you capture the journey of our students. Before, during, after. The student earns their GED, and then they enroll in college, and then years later, they're working in that stable career. It'd be nice to be able to see what your output looks like and kind of where they went to track that journey. And I know a lot of our reports, we kind of have to track that journey. So when you combine all three, our quantitative, qualitative, and longitudinal studies and data, you create data stories that really are not only accurate, but it also becomes memorable. And those are the types of stories that really capture the hearts, it shifts policies, and it opens the doors to greater funding and just overall support.
The one that I want to go back to is under the qualitative data, and that's the success stories. I think that sometimes, we actually miss the opportunity to have our students be our advocates out in the community and to build those partnerships and to share their stories and their success. So I hope that you are collecting those and getting permission to be able to share those, but it also goes a long way to kind of form a group of ambassadors, some students and success stories that are willing to speak out in the community. I came across a wonderful program actually in the state of Iowa. Any Iowans in the room today? We've got an Iowan. I see you back there. So this is from Scott County. Oh, you're the front row. Hey. So the splash zone from Iowa, because they've got that beautiful oceanfront property there. But it was great because their data person at this particular program actually came in as a student that was really struggling in life, trying to make it happen for herself. It took a lot of courage to get in and walk through those doors and to admit that she didn't have a GED because she had been able to fake it for a long time to be able to make it. But she hit that point where she wasn't able to any longer. And she continued on. It wasn't just adult ed that helped her, but she continued right on through that connection of the adult ed and the community college program to earn the degree. And of course, she didn't stop there, and she just kept going and going and going until she reached the point where she was that person for their program. She was doing all of the data. So she's got the IT mind, but more than that, she goes around presenting at conferences just like this one. In fact, she's presented at COABE at least for 2 years. And you might have heard her story and not even realize where she came from. But what it's doing is it's sharing and connecting her success. It's quantitative. She can tell you specifically how now she has a salary and owns her own home and has supported her kids through college and now as a grandma. She can share that and humanize that story. But beyond that, She's out with that longitudinal data telling you about her career advancement, that program forever changed her life, and it's changed generations of lives. So it starts with the success story and being able to say, I did something. But then she's taking it that step further, and she's going out, presenting it to boards, presenting it to partners in the community, telling her story with great pride. And that's what we want our students to do, is become the advocates for us. If you're facing that shortage in your finances, or if you're trying to secure better career pathways for your students can lead the way. You just have to arm them with the data that they need to be able to tell and communicate that story in ways that touch the hearts of people that you are trying to connect with. Now, there are people out there that are the numbers people as well, and they want to hear the story, but the numbers have to support the story. So it's not that you use one category or another. It's that your story has to include all three. You have to be able to include the quantitative data. And this is the numbers. So by the numbers, here's where we're at. And here are the success stories or the testimonials or what our instructors are seeing in the classroom, and connect in that way. And further, this is how it's impacting the bigger picture, the longer picture ahead. So not losing track of those stories as well. Looking back on your data is very important. Sometimes it's really hard to do that when we're focused on the emergencies of today or what's happening in our program currently. It's really easy in adult ed, and I've been there, where I look year to year at where I'm at, but I don't necessarily go back and think, wow, this is what we've done in 10 years. This is what we did in 5 years. This is what we're doing this year. And here's our future goals. Those future goals are determined by the data. We're helping it communicate, where do we go next? So we're using this to identify gaps. If we keep hearing things in our success stories that are praising one particular part, we really want to investigate, why is that so successful? Why is it helping so many students? And then we want to surround that with the quantitative data, and then also maybe talk about economic mobility or that generational impact that we know you have. Raise your hand if you've got a student that like 4 or 5 members of their family have all gone through your program, right? It happens all of the time. And it's great when it does. But is that story in your local newspaper? Hopefully so, because it's encouraging other families to connect in that way too.
So analyzing and interpreting our data. So this is where our data actually becomes truly useful. When we move from just collecting the numbers to actually analyzing them in a way that leads to real insight and program growth. So we start here by examining the actual raw data that we collect. So you collect that raw data and you're starting to actually look for patterns yourself, spot some outliers, compare across really time or just even cohorts or that semester. But you can use like basic tools like a spreadsheet to uncover surprising trends. That's if you use a spreadsheet to apply some filters, sorting data, graph the results. Those pivot tables can be very helpful to just examine raw data. So once you see those actual patterns, then it's time to contextualize those. So don't just ask, what do the numbers say? But ask, what do they mean for your program? Like, are you reaching your intended audience? Are there certain strategies that would actually work better than others? Usually there always is. Are there actually hidden barriers that's affecting our outcomes? So these types of questions would help tie your analysis back, again, to the goals and the missions of your program. And then we'll move into generalizing our insights. So then this is where the conclusions begin to form. Maybe you realize that a certain intake method is linked to higher retention, or that one site actually has better job placement rates than others. So these are the types of insights and examples that should guide your next step. So then finally, you need to implement change, because you're collecting all of that data and you're analyzing it it needs to come to some type of decision. Data is powerful when it leads to action. Whether that means just adjusting your outreach a bit, reallocating some of your sources, or piloting a new strategy, it all starts with analysis. And the process, again, doesn't always have to require those high cost tools, as I said before. So that's whether you're using something like us, Connectable, or a simple spreadsheet, the goal stays the same. Turn your information into action.
And when we look at the contextualize here, it's all about this is the most important part that I think that programs miss is that when you have the data, you have to be able to connect it literally to the goal. Otherwise, we're not communicating the right data. If you've got a number out there that you keep talking about, but it's unrelated to the goals that you have set that are really clear in your community and your program that people can see and that it becomes very strategic, very visible, then it's really hard to be able to get to implement change in the correct way. This is where, when we don't do it, implementing change looks like changing for the sake of change or just disrupting the natural process of, I already know what I'm doing, right? So if we're gonna have change, we have to have a real purpose and a reason for it. And the data has to be the purpose. So we have goals and we have to make sure that all of our data points, that those goals can be assigned to a particular piece of data that you are collecting, that you have ready access to, and that you're not waiting 30 minutes for the report to run or something like that, or that you're having to sit back there and analyze something. So being able to first connect the findings to the program goals and to those community needs. That's where the story begins. And then as we move forward and we're generating those insights, we're drawing those conclusions, and we're actually saying either we're achieving the goal, exceeding the goal, and in some cases, we're missing the goal. That's when we get to that implement change. When we see that we are no longer growing, you've probably heard the old adage, we're dying, right? We don't want our programs to die. We have a reason to continue their growth, to push beyond what other people think's even possible. And to do that, that change requires a really clear path on whether the goal is being achieved or not and the data that's going to support it. So this comes full circle, and as soon as it gets back there and we implement change, guess what happens again? We have new raw data now coming in the door, and we have to continue this process. This is a wheel. It's in constant movement, just like your program. So if this year looks just like last year for you, if the process looks the same, if your systems look the same, if that's the same old spreadsheet you've been using. I had a program up in Michigan. Any Michiganders in here? We got a troll or a Youper? A troll, okay. I'm a former troll, so I lived in Berrien County over in St. Joseph, and I was at a program up there, and it was really interesting because they had some new leadership in there, and when they walked in the doors, they were showing me what they were getting themselves into. And wouldn't you know it, it was paper forms everywhere I went, so much so that if you needed to use a card, a credit card, to pay for one of your course fees or materials, they got out a paper slip, wrote down your credit card number, expiration date, and special little security code, and they would walk it over, and they couldn't even trust an Iowan. They would give it to them, and then they would have to process it through the computer manually. And there were stacks of these different colors for different types of things in their program office. Well, guess what? Those people were still on an Access database that was built in 1996. So, and they were still using it, but it was at capacity. The features were going away. It started to break, and they were losing data. What's that? That's when your child was born? When you were born? That's very awkward. So, yes. So, not only was 1996 the great year that she was born, but also the great year that this program had an Access database that they were still using in 2024. And it wasn't effective. It wasn't working. They got stuck, right? Sometimes we get stuck. Our wheels can get stuck in the mud. We've got to make sure that we're doing this, that we're following this process, that we're constantly in motion, and that we are saying we're not using the same spreadsheet we used last year. The story is different tomorrow. We've got to be able to tell it.
I believe having a list of all of your students' credit cards just out and about may put you out of compliance. Okay.
That has never looked so pretty.
All right. So to present our data effectively, when it comes time to present your data, how you visualize it can actually make or break your message. It's that right chart, the right graphic can instantly clarify a point. And if you know anything about charts, you know that they can be used to tell the story truthfully, or you can tell a lie, but it's the same data. But make sure that you're using it. I think we're back to the ethics situation, ethically, but do tell your story accurately with the right chart, the right data. So bar charts to highlight different types of comparisons, maybe between like locations or cohorts. You can use your line graphs to show change over time. It's like maybe how attendance and test scores have improved throughout your semesters. Pie charts, the tastiest of them all, great for breaking down proportions. And if your message is complex, then consider using an infographic. I love those to be able to combine multiple points into one single visual narrative. But visualization data is really not all that you need to be able to tell your story. It becomes far more powerful when you're able to pair that with real stories. So rather than just saying 85% of our students completed the program, add a face to it. Say something like, Maria was actually one of those. She's now working full time at the local hospital. Like that kind of story will stick than just saying the number and how many people have actually passed your program. Finally, you always want to be able to tailor your message to your audience. So funders, they actually want to be able to see their return on investment. Silly. Those legislators, they really know how their constituents legislators know how their constituents are actually being served. They want to know that. They want to know like how the communities are responding. And the communities are going to respond to your stories that hit close to home. And then they want to be able to know, like, how is that impact on their actual students? They want to see that success is possible for someone like them, or success is possible with your program in that actual community. And when you combine all of the visuals and the right story for your audience, you're going to be able to turn that data into action.
And I want to give you a tool. If you're not great at creating an infographic or being able to figure out impact reports, if that's a struggle, or even grants and being able to report on that information, we have that quantitative side. Artificial intelligence is doing an incredible thing when it comes to data analysis and telling the story. You can provide the accurate information that you have, and you can use the proper language and the proper coding. Utilizing artificial intelligence actually requires you to learn a new language. And I think that's why it's sometimes a little bit intimidating. The best results come when you really know how to code it correctly. If we go back a slide, this same process that we're looking at here, we can provide our goals to something like ChatGPT and say, okay, here are my program goals and here are the results. I need to figure out what change needs to be identified. I need to, now that it has processed this information, because anybody in here besides me and him take 900 level statistics? Anybody painfully go through 12 years of math, right? When you do, you realize that you never want to spend 80 hours on a report again. So artificial intelligence accelerates what it would take us several months to get through and process this deep dive in big data. It can do it in about 3-4 seconds. It's that quick, and it's more accurate because, believe it or not, I've actually made a mistake before. It was in 1996. I remember it clearly. But when it happened, and my family will never let me forget it because it's so rare. But when it happened, it was a math mistake. And we've all been there. We're like, yeah, you hit a fat thumb a key on the keyboard and everything gets thrown off. I accidentally put something in a wrong cell. So again, using like these protected fields, having systems in place that allow you to do it, but also utilizing the technology that's literally free to you to be able to get on there and use this in new ways. Artificial intelligence is helping you know not just what change needs to occur, what your data is saying, but it can create a strategy for you. It can create actionable SMART goals, things like that. And you can also continue to interact with it. So you can say, okay, here we are ready to examine it again. You can upload that spreadsheet or upload that data report and let it communicate. And then we move it further on where we were on this slide, where we're saying choose the right visualization. If you don't know what the right visualization is, You're not alone anymore. You're not just trying to figure out what's going to communicate to this employer, this partner, this legislator, this community group, but you're actually able to present it in ways and utilize artificial intelligence to say, create an infographic for me. Or better yet, do what we did and write out all the outline and everything that we needed to present and just pop it in Gamma. And in about 2 minutes, you've got a full PowerPoint because we didn't do any of this. AI did.
All right. So using data for growth and advocacy. So one of the most powerful things that we can do with data is drive change. That's internally and externally. So program improvement, that's where it starts. The regular analysis of your data can really help you spot those gaps, highlight what's working, and then inform decisions about everything from instructional strategies to resource allocation. So when your staff actually understands that this process is not just about compliance, but about improving outcomes, they actually become more engaged in that data process. And a lot of us couldn't do it without our grants, right? So grant writing, another space where strong data makes that huge difference. Those funders really want more than those stories. They actually want to see the proof. They want that proof, and that data is what shows that proof. They're being able to show the program's reach. When you're able to show that impact and the outcomes using concrete data, that's going to help you stand out in that competitive application process. The data shows that you're not just doing good work, but you're measuring it and you're making it sustainable. And then we're into community advocacy. So community advocacy is where we extend that story further beyond our walls. We're able to share data in that public-facing, accessible way that builds trust and attracts new supporters, whether it's a local business or other nonprofits. You could have some new partners as well who really want to be a part of that mission that you have. So then finally, we're here to policy influence. So when you're able to present a clear evidence-based outcome to your legislators or any type of decision maker for that point, you're really better positioned to advocate for the increased funding. Maybe you want to expand your services or just policy changes that benefit your learners. So you're no longer just asking for support, you're showing why it's needed and how it works. And then when data actually drives your growth into advocacy, you're going to be able to move from reacting to then leading.
When you're working on some of these things like influencing policy, again, we know what numbers are important to us, and we have this idea of what we think is important to those that we're communicating it to. But if you know much about self-awareness, you know that it's got those 3 concepts involved. That's what I think the other person is thinking, and then what they're actually thinking. And we actually know from that idea of self-awareness that very rarely, and if you're married, you know this 100%, very rarely is it true that what you think they're thinking is actually what they're thinking. And that's difficult to deal with, but it's the reality. Yes, shocking, I know. It's a policy influence problem as well, because when we're communicating to these people, we haven't asked them oftentimes, what data or what could I tell you? What would provide an opportunity to change your mind? See, our minds are often set by what we know. And if we need to change a mind, we need to know what information is needed in order to be able to change your mind. So if you've got a policy in place, or if there's a bill out there that you're kind of unsettled about and you're not really sure, you know what you want to say, but you don't know how that message is going to be received. And sometimes it's actually not going to be received well because you're on the opposite side of where that person's standing. This is a great opportunity, again, to sit down and to talk to that person, to hear what they have to say, to then ask them, so what data are you using in order to be able to make these decisions? And then take note of it And right there in your phone, hopefully you can whip out that data system that you're using and be able to share with them those numbers. Having that accessibility to data is really important. So having a system in place that allows you at a glance to be able to pull it up and say, you mentioned this. Let's talk about that. What number do you think it is in our community? And they may think it's very different than the reality, but you've got the hardcore proof that your decisions are impacting our community. And that's what we want to share there. Grant writing is another one where don't you wish that you could predict what those jurors on that grant selection committee were thinking? I kind of tested this a little bit with one of my friends recently. Anybody from Kentucky in here? Kentuckians? No Kentuckians? Okay, well, good. I'm going to tell you the secret too. So here's how you can gain one of the highest awards in Kentucky. It's called a Colonel of Kentucky, just like Colonel Sanders and the great KFC Almighty. We have the Colonel Award, and you can become a Kentucky Colonel. I found this out because they had an application online that said, here are all the qualifiers. I took my friend's resume, I uploaded it to ChatGPT. I said, here is the qualifiers, here is their resume, connect the dots for me. 30 days later, he received in the mail this giant award that Mr. John is now a Kentucky Colonel. He lives in Indiana, by the way. It did not have a residency requirement. So don't tell the Kentuckians. They are the education state, in case you didn't know that. But you too could be a Kentucky Colonel. All you need is a little data about yourself and a little idea of what is the application looking for? How will I best communicate my story? So being proactive and being able to open up those grant applications. What are the requirements? I promise you, it's going to look at your data. It's going to look at that application. It's going to connect the dots. Programs that are doing this are doing incredible things with these grant funds. I know personally a lot of our members at Connectable are using this for the Dollar General grant to even pay their membership fees, because Dollar General knows what we do and want to see that it's successful, but programs don't necessarily know how to ask for that money or what data is needed to support that decision. So where is that coming from? Walmart, anybody go through that grant process, especially like 2 years ago when it all changed and you had to kind of start over and you didn't have all your past application stuff? That can be really confusing, right? So it's helping you connect these dots to tell that story. So all of these can do that, but those two, I think it's really important that we see that it's the requirements versus the data you have, and that you can connect the dots to tell that story, but you don't have to do it alone. You can use technology to help you do it, whether it's looking at your phone and doing the reporting right in front of the legislature or running through some things on ChatGPT to become a Kentucky Colonel.
I kind of want to do that. I'm a Hoosier, but I think I'm going to look into that myself. It's a great question. Yeah, and for those listening online, somebody asked, what are the accolades that went along with being a colonel? All right. The team original recipe. All right, look, hey, we actually have some data up here. So as we close out soon too, I want to remind everyone that you do not need to be a data scientist to tell powerful stories with numbers. Start where you are. Like, use simple, free, accessible tools. Canva. Anybody use Canva? Right? So great for infographics. Excel, Google Sheets for basic charts. Tools like Tableau Public when you're ready to explore more advanced tasks. So what really matters most is consistency and clarity. Question, do any of you have any other simple free tools that you use for data? Any other examples out there?
Are people using AI for it? You are? Yeah, Gemini is a good one, yes.
Yeah, being able to drop documents into ChatGPT or Gemini and ask it to analyze them and give you strengths and weaknesses, like, it's incredibly time saving. They do occasionally make mistakes, so you have to verify it, but it's super helpful.
Yeah, if any of you have watched the news ever, you've seen, like, yeah, they make mistakes. Sometimes the data may not be accurate, right? So it's only as good as the data. Yeah, any other tools that you know that you use? We got one back here. Yeah. Sure. Well, we've got just a little bit left and then questions. So let's wait on that. Any other good tools for data analysis? Nobody else is like an IBM SPSS fan besides me? No layered statistics, you know? No? Okay. Those are days of the past, right? Because the reality is that Access, SPSS, these kind of things, they're programs that are really outdated, and so are spreadsheets, right? So using an advanced data system is kind of what helps you. And obviously, I'm biased, but I'm using this as the story that we're telling. So this is our own case study, and we used again AI to come up with this, to be able to say, okay, we're doing this presentation. Give us an example using ourselves of what would our data tell us, and just a couple categories to highlight. So like maybe just like how far their reach is, what does it span? Well, when we're talking about the communities that we're serving, they're adult ed programs, and they're specifically looking at adult ed curriculum. So it took this journey that said, well, let's mention that it's used in 200 plus communities, but also let's connect what tools or curriculum are those communities using us for, or how do they get access? So if they're using our learning management system, we found that it was pulling out things like Burlington English, Aztec, Essential Ed, things you can access just right from the platform. And it knows that because, see, it has the data. So it knows out of those 200 plus communities, those are the ones that keep popping up on that connectable screen that people keep clicking on. We look at then like, well, scholarships, how much was provided? It quantifies it kind of in a whole number. It gave a specific dollar, and we said, simplify that. So $250,000 last year went back to our programs. Well, where did that money come from? We don't have it. Do you have it? We didn't have it. Our programs not necessarily getting more funding, right? So where did it come from? Well, corporate partners. That's the main reason that our membership dues have declined and have been cut in half in the past 5 years. Is it's not because we gave money, it's because corporate partners continue to support adult ed programs just like yours that says, we want you to have an advantage. Grants, I'd mentioned like the Dollar General grant, the literacy grants. You've got community foundations. You've got all kinds of different partners that you could reach out to that could help support you. And what is it doing? Well, why is it important that we tell you about the number of scholarships that we're providing? Well, it's because it helps keep your membership levels inexpensive. Without that, the technology that we use is really expensive. And you probably don't have, when we started, it was $30,000 to $50,000. Now it's like $2,500 to $10,000. Things change a lot because technology is becoming more accessible. And we want to highlight that accessibility helps everybody. And speaking of accessibility, because we said that was important, it mentioned it's 24/7 now. Programs, and this is a big one when I was in that adult ed world, in the program level, I had employers coming and saying, those classes don't work. You're not even open when people are getting off work at 10 o'clock. So where are they going to go? You know, they don't have access to you. So having programs like on the door, just a QR code that people could go to, or a way of accessing the system and registering easily online, creating those success steps, helping them track through the process, making it where your doors don't have to be open in order to do that. So it's communicating that online support, those learning communities, that again, they're not alone. We can create groups of people in an employer's world that are all achieving the same goal together. So getting the employers involved and saying, hey, who in your world needs a high school diploma? Who's missing that piece of paper that we can help achieve? Or who needs a new skill? You know, how are your jobs changing? Maybe because of AI and technology. They say 70% of the jobs are going to be replaceable by 2025. Guess what? We're here. We've exceeded it. Now they say even more than that. I went and tried to get a Jamocha shake at Arby's the other day, and one complaint because they're not as good as they used to be. But also, it was only AI that I was talking to, and they had a little sign up there that said, you know, no one's working this drive-through. You know, you're using this new technology. And I thought, okay, maybe that's better because I don't know if I want to talk to people. So, you know, I don't need the judgment about the shake, right? But making sure that these things are accessible and available anywhere. Again, it's hard to have like a program or an app that you have to download. So using like web-based tools that you can reach on any device, making it extremely accessible. You don't need to be a data scientist to tell those compelling stories. This is the stuff that AI came up with just about us. See, it knows to bold it, to change the font, to move things around on the slide. And it can do it for you so that you're presenting your numbers, your story in the community, at chambers of commerce, at economic development, at corporate partnerships, to your legislators, creating those infographics. So what do? Well, we start with accessible tools like something like Canva, creating those infographics, Excel for basic charts, Tableau. Well, where did you hear all that? From Matthew's outline, right? It's coming back. It's using the data that it already had to create this information for you to digest now and to do so in a simple way. And then we said, so plug it. Tell everybody why it's so great. Well, we don't have to do it. It's going to do it. And it's going to pull out the things based on this that says this is important. So offers all-in-one solution, specifically designed for adult education programs. It's combining the data collection, the analysis, the grant tracking, the student information system. It's the only system that's both FERPA and HIPAA compliant. It has two-way text. It's logging that student information and the employee files all in one place. And it's so much more. It allows your story to be easily shared in your community. We could have this read as a radio ad and it could be beamed across those airways, right? Again, we don't have to tell the story. It can do it for you. But you have to have the data. So the data that you collect is going to determine the story that you're capable of telling. And having good systems and goals in place that connect them all together, that's what we're all about.
So I just end on the thought as far as like kind of how do you get started? I say to start small, share often, and grow intentionally. And to transition into a maybe tangent question about AI, I'll just put my own line about AI. If you're an educator and you want to humble yourself, keep an open mind to do this, but take one of your strongest lesson plans and put it in the Chat GPT and ask it how well you've done. And is there any improvements? And like I said, it will humble you because that was your best lesson plan. But mine have been better as a result.
Definitely.
It is a tool.
Well, I want to go to that directly. So yeah, artificial intelligence has been around for a really, really long time. And that means that something like a calculator is artificial intelligence. And when I was in school, it was something that we weren't allowed to use. And you know that the requirement to graduate high school was actually just high school mathematics. It didn't require algebra, but today it does. So see, our skill set has advanced because of the use of calculators and technology. Many of you would not have been able to get through like your graduate level statistics course or an analytic geometry class if it weren't for the use of the calculator. So AI is advancing our skill set, our data analysis. We're getting results so quickly now that it's actually advancing society in that whole way. We did have a question online that just said, you know, is this recording going to be available and things? Just know that not only is it available for you to watch on that Whova app, but it also, our slides and things will be added after this as well. So you can go back, you can take screenshots. I saw some of you taking pictures, but it's going to be available through the app as well. Now our question about sort of a tangent AI.
Thank you. I work at the state level and am a newbie to using AI, so I do appreciate the tips and tricks today. However, I am concerned about sharing state level data with AI. Then there's a second part to my question. And then also, so I have used it a little bit, but I've essentially uploaded kind of my interpretation of what the numbers say and have it help me kind of improve that. But then also, so if you could speak to that, and then also, do you have any thoughts about, I've heard some discussion about AI potentially perpetuating stereotypes and biases. And so if you could speak to that as well, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
So we'll begin. Just raise your hand if you have a bias. right? So artificial intelligence is simulating something called authentic intelligence is what you all have, right? Expert systems is one of the three forms of artificial intelligence. And that means that we are trying to replicate what we know up here and then put it into hyperspeed, doing things that we're incapable of doing. There are systems out there, and of course, like using a free access and things like that to ChatGPT or DeepSeek, things like that, that is a little bit risky. It's less risky than if you're using a Google Sheet, but it's more risky than, you know, if you're using another secure database system that maybe the state's implemented. But working with a lot of state systems, especially like your state data reporting systems, I've been in several states that have their own. It would take Matthew and I probably about 3.5 minutes to hack into that. I actually got a API for Banner. If anybody uses like Banner at their college, that's what I used. I was surprised because it's like written in 1996 code, so it's like extremely outdated, so very easy to hack into. That's why, again, like we just released another new server last weekend, actually. We do that about every 6 months, and it's because you have to stay in front of it. If you're collecting data, the truth is, I don't know what state you're from, but where is it? Okay, so definitely Oregon. Their state systems are outdated. So like you're actually putting at risk, putting it on your state computers, right? So using AI, least of your concern, probably much more secure, especially if you're, I'm not even being funny though. I appreciate the laughter, but no, it's just the reality, right? So that being able to securely authorize and authenticate like who you are and what you have access to, those are the two keys. The systems that you have, if you are paying, like if you do the paid subscription to ChatGPT, you can host it through an organization. You can select the privacy. You can say it's not accessible outside of the organization. It makes it so much harder to get into than your personal computer that I could easily get into. So if you have something saved on a hard drive, on a flash drive, or on the cloud, I already know you're not concerned about security, or you wouldn't be doing that, right? So it's just not the reality. But I know that's our fear, right? Is what will happen to the data if it gets out there? Well, the truth is, it's probably more secure than the way you have it now. So if you're not already concerned about your process, looking for a more advanced way, you should be. And that more advanced way is going to be a cloud-based, secure form of a server that has at least a SOC 2 compliance that's FERPA and HIPAA certified. Most of your programs are not there yet, and I understand that. I know there are still paper forms. I've been in that world, and I also had the same issues. But there are ways of protecting yourself. Some of it's knowledge base. Using AI is a new skill set for many people, especially with these tools. So get formal training on it. I would not just give a calculator to somebody and put them in a trigonometry class. I would have to show them first how to use that type of calculator, even a scientific calculator like a TI-30. It may seem real easy to you, but if you're used to a 4-function calculator, you're not prepared to use that, right? So break out the TI-81 and you're like, why is there a screen and why is it like monochromatic, right? That's not even the world we're in today. Today, the calculator's in your pocket. You can take a picture and it's just going to solve the equation for you way faster, give you step-by-step, help you identify even what you did wrong or the mistakes that you made. So that's kind of addressing it a little bit. And I know there was like some taking it as humor, but I want to really communicate that that's just the truth. Those systems are not secure. The data is not protected in any kind of way. If that's the fear, I can alleviate the fear. These systems are more secure than anything you're using currently. Yeah. Other questions that you might have? I think we're right at time, so excellent. Well, listen, that's our contact information. We use AI, of course, so all you have to do is email hello@getconnectable. It's going to know if you're talking to Matthew, I, or Amy, or anybody else. And there's our phone number up there, so feel free to connect. We love to connect. It's our ability to do so at these conferences, so thanks for attending this session as well. And we'll stick around if you have other questions or just need to chat. We have AI courses available too, so feel free to stop by the booth tomorrow. I also have a session tomorrow at 11 a.m., so feel free to come and see me again. That one's talking about prioritization, and it uses AI to do it using the Eisenhower matrix. I'd love to have you back on that. It'll blow your mind.